camera crew ready? Not yet. You guys are ready or not? Ready? Okay. So Aaron Fruh is a research scholar, fellow rather at ISGAP. And he's also the president of the Israel Team Advocates International, a nonprofit organization that advocates on behalf of Jewish existence in Israel. It engages professors and students in Christian college campuses pushing back against the growing narrative of anti-Zionism. Aaron is also the head running our new podcast series, and Aaron is always there to help with the support, which is amazing. And I don't know if you're going to get into it, but he has an amazing personal story. Maybe after we'll actually go to Aaron. We're going to talk to him at a tea break. Today, Aaron's going to speak about Chrislamismarxianity, which is a term coined by Aaron. An examination of the post-October 7th anti-Semitic religion of the Palestinian Christianity and its alarming acceptance within the Western church world. So Aaron, the floor is yours, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Charles. So I want you to say that very fast. Chrislamismarxianity, okay? It's a word I made up.
You may not be into marketing.
I thought about maybe getting a patent for that name, but okay, so I run a NGO, a nonprofit called Israel Team Advocates, and I work in the arena of the Christian world, contending with historic European anti-Semitism that's mutating today in the Christian world, and specifically my world is in America. On the Christian left, we have the growing movement of Chrislamismarxianity that we're going to talk about today. On the Christian right in America, we have the growing movement of Christian nationalism. And I want to open by sharing a quote from a friend of mine. And the quote is, "Our stories become us. Our stories become us." And Lord Rabbi Sachs talked about the mutation of anti-Semitism, and anti-Semitism continually mutates from generation to generation. And so my story is about contending with this new mutation of anti-Semitism within the Christian world. And so in this room today, there are Jews, there are people from the Christian faith, there are people from the Muslim faith, there's people from the Hindu faith, there's people maybe agnostic or even atheist. You're from different contexts and cultures. But what's unique about everyone in this room is you've all traveled from many different countries around the world here to Oxford to sharpen your skills to contend with the world's oldest hatred, which is anti-Semitism. And my question for you is, how did you arrive here? What brought you to this place? And in Hebrew, there's a phrase, lador vador, from generation to generation. And somewhere woven into your story, and it's my personal belief that you were handpicked for this assignment, because there's very few people in the world that are involved in what you're doing in fighting anti-Semitism. And I think you're probably handpicked somewhere in your generation past, possibly in your life now. Woven into your story is maybe a grandparent, a great-grandparent, a parent, maybe a mentor that encouraged you to stand for moral clarity. And you're here because you have a deep sense of moral clarity in your soul. And you're here because you desire to advocate for civil rights. And you have this call to justice that's in your very DNA and your being. And so our stories become us. And so your story, whatever it is, whoever imparted into your life, those moral values of fighting injustice, of anti-Semitism, that story is becoming you. And for me, I'll just share the story that Charles mentioned just really briefly. My great-grandfather is really the beginning of my story. Yankel, his wife's name is Sarah, Yankel Boxerman in Trostenets, Belarusia. And Yankel defended his little shtetl from the pogroms. He was a fighter, and he protected his little community from the Russian pogroms. And they say that a person can die twice. The first time a person dies is when they take their last breath. The second time a person dies is when their friends and family and loved ones forget to tell their stories. And so I'm living the story of my great-great-grandfather, Yankel. I think about him every day. I'm fighting anti-Semitism because of my great-grandfather, imparted something through the generations into my life. So how do I have a platform to speak about Christian anti-Semitism in this time, contemporary Christian anti-Semitism in the Christian community? My great-grandparents, the Kishinev pogroms in 1903 in Russia, they fled. And they went through Canada and then came to America, to Los Angeles. They were Orthodox Jews, card-carrying communists, because that's the culture they came from. My grandmother was born in Canada on the way to Los Angeles. And my grandmother, as a young woman, converted to Christianity, my Orthodox Jewish grandmother. And so, because of that, my great-grandparents, Jacob and Celia, they disowned my grandmother, and they never spoke of her again. And it was because, I didn't know that when I grew up, but it was because of what their family back in Russia had suffered at the hands of Protestant and Catholic Christians in the Kishinev pogroms that murdered many Jews. And then my great-grandmother's brothers, 7 brothers that stayed in Trostenets, they were all murdered by baptized Christians in 1942. Most German soldiers were baptized Christians, and so they were all murdered by Christians. So my great-grandmother just had this angst, rightfully so, towards the Christian faith. I didn't know that then, and my great-grandmother was 6 hours away from me. I grew up in, my Jewish grandparents moved to Northern California, where I was born and raised, and my great-grandmother never wanted to have anything to do. I was the eldest grandson of 28 grandchildren. And my great-grandmother never wanted to see me, never wanted anything to do with me. So I had this angst, this sense of my grandmother's rejection, my own rejection, not knowing why becoming a Christian was so powerfully negative and destructive to my great-grandmother's family. And so what I did is I went to seminary. I became a pastor. I had Jewish roots, but I became a pastor, and I had no connection to my Jewish ancestry. I had no connection to Israel, never wanted to go to Israel, couldn't care less about Israel, couldn't care less about the fact that I had Jewish blood. And I started going to conferences about how the church had replaced Israel, and I began to teach supersessionism, replacement theology, triumphalism, that the church has triumphed over Israel. And so as a pastor, 2002, I had pastoral staff, secretaries, 120 employees at our church. It was like a machine, and I'm like Captain Kirk, at the head, and I'm in my office probably writing a budget for something, and somehow, I don't know what you call it, maybe an epiphany, all of a sudden something spoke to me, and maybe it was my great-grandfather, I don't know, but you're a Jew, go to Israel and find your family. And that was my grandmother's dying prayer, that I'd go to Israel and find my family. And I walked out of my office. I was a mess. I was crying. My secretary said, "What happened to you?" I said, "Cheryl, I don't know, but I'm a Jew, and I'm going to Israel to find my family." And the next day she came in, my secretary, she handed me an envelope. She said, "I think you should read this." And it was a letter from the Israeli government. It was the time of the Intifada, and inviting me to an all-expense-paid trip to Israel to try to encourage me to bring a tour, because no tours were going. It was 0 tourists in those years, at that time. And so 3 weeks later, God has a sense of humor. I'm in a first-class El Al plane to Tel Aviv after this event. I call my Uncle Harry, my grandmother's brother-in-law, who was still alive in Hawaii. Uncle Harry was a Hollywood special effects director. He made the C's part in the 10 Commandments. And Uncle Harry Stern made it out of Jell-O. That's family history there. The C's were Jell-O that he made. Anyway, so I called him. He gave me the number of my grandmother's cousins, my dad's cousins in Israel. And I get to Israel. I have a government person phone my grandmother's first cousin. And I said, this is Aaron. I'm Rose's grandson. He said, who's Rose? I says, my grandmother. It's Celia's daughter, Paulina's sister. He said, that's impossible, but where are you staying? I told him. I get to the hotel in Jerusalem. The phone's ringing when I walk in, and I picked it up. It's David, my dad's cousin, and he said, come and visit me in my house. So I canceled my trip home a week after the tour. I rented a car, I drove to Netziona, Israel, went into his condominium, and he said, who are you? I said, Rose's grandson. He said, Rose, who's Rose? And I said, Celia's daughter. He said, he thought I was a Ginzu knife salesman, right? And I'm staring at the squares in his condominium, ceiling tiles, thinking, how do I get out of this gracefully? I need to get out because I'm an imposter. And he said, I'm the avionics director for El Al Airlines. I fly to LA every year. I stayed with your great-grandmother when she was alive, your supposed great-grandmother. And then when she passed, I stayed with Paulina. All my family died in the Holocaust. The only remaining family I have is Uncle Harry Stern in Hawaii. I said, well, this is who I am. He said, that's impossible. They never mentioned another daughter. She was dead to them. So he calls his sister in Tel Aviv, Manuka. She gets on the phone. He's yelling in Hebrew. Then he's crying. He hands me the phone. She said, Aaron, I've been waiting 50 years to tell this story. Your great-grandmother told me there's another daughter. She converted to this strange religion in Christianity, and she's dead, never to mention it to anyone in Israel. And so, long story short, that started a journey in my life back and forth to Israel during the Intifada, doing medical humanitarian work with the Israeli fire department. We brought defibrillators to the fire department because many people that died in the buses died of their heart stopped. And not shrapnel from the bombs or their heart stopped. Long story short, 7 years ago, I resigned to fight what I'd been preaching for all those years, which is supersessionism, replacement theology. And so all that to say, that's my story. So live your story, frame your story. There's something in your DNA, some moral clarity that came from Yankel, right? And by the way, that day when my cousin found out that I was alive, he went in to the bedroom, came out with his grandson's bar mitzvah genealogy that he'd written. He wrote my grandmother's name, and then he wrote my name into the genealogy. And then he laid his hands on my head and prayed a Jewish blessing. And that began my journey. And he told me the story of Yankel. And I've lived that story every day since that day. And there's a great scripture, and I think it represents ISGAP. And the scripture is Zechariah 8:23, which says, in that time and in those days, 10 men, and I'll add women, from around the nations will grab the sleeve of a Jew, saying, we must go with you, for God is with you. And so, since I came to ISGAP, I've grabbed the sleeve of Charles, and I say, I must go with you, for God is with you. And everyone that's here, yep. Everyone that's here, whoever you are. I talked to my friend here, a Syrian Christian, and she said, I'm a Syrian Christian, but my heart is Jewish. And Zechariah 8:23, fulfilled. She's grabbing the sleeve of ISGAP, Jewish organization. I must go with you, for God is with you. Okay, so that's my intro. I went too long, but I'm here today to talk about Chrislamismarxianity, and all that's to encourage you. You have a story, and you're here because of a story. So frame your story. I like to collect art in secondhand shops, and often I find these great pieces, oil paintings. No one buys them because there's no frame. I take them to a frame shop, and I put on the frame, and everybody says, what a beautiful picture. And so your life has to be framed around your story. Frame your story. It inspires your passion for what you're doing. Okay, so Chrislamismarxianity, an examination of the post-10/7 anti-Semitic religion of Palestinian Christianity and its alarming acceptance within the church world. And so this is what you might call intersectionality, but I call it, my word for it is because I think in pictures, my word for it is cross-pollination. And little quote about cross-pollination. In the changing environment, the genetic variability within cross-pollinated population may enable some individuals to be adapted to their new situation, ensuring survival of the species, whereas the individuals resulting from self-pollination might all be unable to adjust. Self-pollination or selfing, although foolproof in a stable environment, thus is an evolutionary cul-de-sac. So cross-pollination often happens with wind. And so in the winds of change that we're experiencing today in the world, there's this intersectionality, what I call cross-pollination happening in the Christian world and different arenas as well, but Christianity is merging in the Christian left with Marxism and Islamism, and we'll see that today. The place of cross-pollination is Bethlehem Bible College in Bethlehem of Judea. The breeding ground of the new global religion of Chrislamismarxianity is an organization called Christ at the Checkpoint. And Christ at the Checkpoint started in 2010 at Bethlehem Bible College, led by a man who started his career at North Park College in Chicago. He started an organization called the Center for Middle East Understanding. It's anti-Zionist, it's anti-Semitic. They moved their organization to Wheaton College, which is Billy Graham's alma mater. It's my alma mater. And Wheaton College, you would say, is the flagship evangelical school in America and fomented his anti-Semitism there for probably 20 years. Wheaton is the Center for Christianity Today, the flagship magazine for the evangelical movement. And so Christ at the Checkpoint, notice on one side is the cross, and the other side is the wall. So the idea is that Christ is a Palestinian refugee on the other side of the wall who cannot even enter his own country. And so the idea is also that Christ himself is a Palestinian. This is this year's Christ at the Checkpoint. It took place a couple months ago, May 21st through 26th. I've been following Christ at the Checkpoint since its inception in 2010, but this year something changed, drastically changed, and we'll talk about that today. Christ at the Checkpoint is challenging evangelicals to take responsibility to help resolve the conflicts in Israel-Palestine by engaging with the teaching of Jesus on the kingdom of God. So that's their mission. The Checkpoint's goal is to highlight injustices in the Palestinian territories by Israel and more centrally to steer U.S. evangelicals, especially away from traditional friendship for Israel towards neutrality or even hostility. Checkpoint represents a wider movement, mostly confined to evangelical elites, to neutralize a key pro-Israel constituency in America with hopes of moving the U.S. geostrategically toward neutrality between Israel and its enemies. Unfortunately, their perspective ignores the nasty reality of the Middle East, where democracy, human rights, and religious liberty are largely confined to Israel and absent nearly everywhere else. Israel has the only growing Christian population in the region. Exertion by Checkpoint and its allies in the wider movement to curtail evangelical Israel friendship does no favors for Palestinians by feeding their victimology and usually ignoring the deep issues among Palestinians that mitigate against responsible statehood. Okay, so that quote is by Mark Tooley in Front Page Magazine in 2012. So there's been some evangelical leaders that are Zionists that have been following Christ at the Checkpoint since its inception. The NGO Monitor came out with an article stating that the US, UK, Netherlands fund anti-Israel Christ at the Checkpoint. So the United States government is funding this anti-Zionist evangelical organization. And March 6, 2014, in Jewish News Service, Sean Savage says the U.S., U.K., and Dutch governments are helping to fund a conference called Christ at the Checkpoint, which attempts to sway evangelical Christians' opinions against Israel and whose themes have anti-Semitic overtones, according to a new report issued by the Jerusalem-based watchdog group NGO Monitor. So there are a few that are following this organization. This is a piece I wrote in the Algemeiner just in May 13th, 2024. Once again, Bethlehem Bible College will host its biannual conference, Christ the Checkpoint, on May 21st through 26th. 2024 in Bethlehem. Christ the Checkpoint is an evangelical organization established in 2010, is known for its anti-Israel views and advocacy. NGO Monitor exposed the anti-Zionist activities of the organization when it reported that Christ the Checkpoint seeks to advance the Palestinian nationalist agenda within evangelical Christian churches while simultaneously reviving theological anti-Semitic themes such as replacement theology. Other anti-Jewish themes promoted at Christ the Checkpoint conference include de-Judaizing of Jesus and the promotion of a racial theory of Jewish origins. So interestingly, and this is in my article, that's an end quote of NGO, the obvious problem with this narrative is that Palestine, I mean, calling Jesus a Palestinian, did not exist in Jesus' day. 135 CE, the Romans, in attempting to erase any Jewish existence in connection to the land of their ancestors, spitefully renamed Judea, Syria, Palestinia, or Philistia in honor of Israel's ancient extinct enemy, the Philistines. Think David and Goliath. By naming their organization Christ the Checkpoint, the leaders seek to portray Jesus as culturally connected to modern Palestinians, and in so doing distort and erase the long-standing Jewish connection to the land of Israel. And I add in this article that the Romans tried the same thing, and they've entered into the dust of history. So, okay. NGO Monitor picked up on my article in Algemeiner, and they quote my article in the NGO Monitor a couple of days later. The Odyssey, the new religion of Chrislamismarxianity, and its cross-pollination at Bethlehem Bible College at Christ the Checkpoint. So we're going to look at 3 areas of examination. I'm going to talk for about another 10 minutes, and then I'm going to show you some clips from the speakers at this year's Christ the Checkpoint. So the historical cross-pollination of Islamic Palestinianism with Marxism. So how does this happen? You have replacement theology, which is historic European Christian anti-Semitic theology that started with Justin Martyr, the early church father, that basically said Christians have replaced the Jews. God has rejected the Jews as the chosen. And that theology spread through all the church fathers, culminating in the Council of Nicaea in 325, when Constantine and the church council cast out everything Hebraic or Jewish from the Christian faith. And at that moment, the state and the church merged, and the church was weaponized with the state for the purpose of persecuting Jews through the Middle Ages. Okay, so how did this unholy alliance of Christianity, Islamism, and Marxism come about? It's Christ the Checkpoint, and we're just specifically looking at the checkpoint today. Started with a man named Naim Atik. Naim Atik, by all accounts, is what I would call a raging anti-Semite. Naim Atik, in his book, there's an article in Jewish News Service, The Theology of Lies and Hatred of Naim Atik, May 28, 2018, by Moshe Dan. And Naim Atik is an Anglican priest at St. George's Church. He's the founder of Sabeel and the Friends of Sabeel. And Sabeel is an Arabic word for the way. And Atik mixes supersessionism, Marxism, liberation theology, Palestinian nationalism. He mixes that with Christianese theological language in which to strike out against Israel. in this article by Moshe Dan, JNS, May 28th, 2018, he says, Atik condemns Israel as a settler colonial state that seeks to dispossess the Palestinians, Muslims, and Christians of their land and replace them with Jews who engage in ethnic cleansing and annihilation. He criticizes Judaism as a form of tribalism, a racist theology practiced by people who worship a God who has been created in the image of those who are thirsty for revenge, based on the exclusive biblical texts that are being used to justify and ethnically cleanse Palestinians. And so Atik justifies violence, and he justifies Palestinian resistance. And so Atik became so radicalized after his first appearance at 2010 at Christ the Checkpoint. A few years later, he was phased out of the Checkpoint's programming. And in came a host of left-leaning evangelical theologians who built a theological base to destroy Zionism, to push back against Christian Zionism within evangelicalism. And the leader of this theology is none other than Dr. Gary Burge of Wheaton College that I mentioned earlier, who started the Center for Middle East Understanding. And what's positive about Gary Burge? I don't find really too much positive, but the fact is how one man could cause so much angst within the evangelical movement against Israel. It gives me hope that, it only takes one to start something new, to counter this offensive. So Gary Burge has written many books. One of his first book is entitled Whose Land, Whose Promise? Has a picture of an IDF tank with a Palestinian boy with a rock. So the IDF is Goliath, the little Palestinian boy with the rock is David. And Gary Burge says this, on page 176 of his book, and I share this with my friends and they say, no one would ever say that. It's on page 176, look it up. It's in his book, Whose Land, Whose Promise. If Israeli Jews do not convert to Christianity, they're good for nothing and should be cast into the fires and burned alive. So that is an evangelical seminary professor at Billy Graham's alma mater calling for the burning of Jews. And what's amazing to me is anti-Semites like Gary Burge, why is it that they always resort to burning? Same as Hamas, they resorted to burning Jews. In the Inquisition, thousands upon thousands of Jews were burned alive in their synagogues. And it's something within the heart and souls of these evangelical anti-Semites. They're enraged to the point where they must call for the burning of Jews to get their point across. But in his book, Jesus and the Land, you might wonder, how does an evangelical pastor or professor come to the point of saying Jews have no right to the land? And Gary Burge, in his book, I'll just read you a few quotes from his book, Jesus and the Land. Jesus' central message was the kingdom of God. While he announced the kingdom's arrival within the land, in no matter is the kingdom linked to the territorial aspirations of Judaism. So, in other words, God spoke to Abraham, the Abrahamic covenant, Genesis 12. I'm going to make you a people, give you national identity. I'm going to make you a blessing to the nations, and whoever blesses you will be blessed, and I'm going to give you your own land as an eternal possession. I looked up the word eternal in Webster's. I'm not that smart, but it means eternal, right? So I'm giving you an eternal possession. But Gary Burge and these evangelical theologians, they've weaved a new theological story to say, well, that was under the old covenant. Under the new covenant of Christ, it's globalized. The vision of the new covenant under Jesus is globalized. There's no significance of the land. But in reality, what he's saying is there's no significance for the land for Jews, but it is significant for Palestinian Christians. So he says it belongs to them because they are the living stones of the land. And I'll read you one more quote, and I have 15, but I'm not going to take time to read them all. But you get the idea. At no point do the earliest Christians view the Holy Land as a locus of divine activity to which the people of the Roman Empire must be drawn. They do not promote the Holy Land either for the Jew or for the Christian as a vital aspect of faith. No diaspora Jew or pagan Roman is converted and then reminded of the importance of the Holy Land. And at the end of his book, he says, I, for my part, have visited Israel 25 times and will continue to lead tours there wherever feasible. Yet this is only out of historic, biblical, and devotional interest, never out of belief that the Lord favors Israel today or considers modern Jews to be his chosen people. Biblically speaking, there is no more Holy Land under the new covenant, and in Christ, all space and time is holy. The Lord's vineyard is no longer Israel or the land of Israel. Rather, it is global. And so that is the ideology within the left-leaning evangelicals. The land of Israel no longer has any biblical significance. Thank you, Gary Birch. All right. The historic cross-pollination of Islamic Palestinianism within Marxism. The definition of Palestinianism. This is from Victor Rosenthal writing September 3rd, 2022 in White Rose magazine. I won't take time to read the entire quote, but Palestinianism is more of a collection of political beliefs. It is a closed system of memes, including historical narrative, a cause to which its believers aspire, and an idiosyncratic language in which familiar words have special meanings. In those ways, it is similar to Marxism, which is not surprising considering its origin. Palestinianism is neutral on the religious secular axis, although it has adopted elements of Islamic belief where they have proven helpful to advance the Palestinian cause. He goes on to talk about Palestinianism has had its origins in the 1960s when it was created by the cognitive warriors of the Soviet KGB. The Soviets had an interest for some time in opposing U.S. and British influence in the Middle East, which they did by supporting Arab nationalists like Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser. With the decline of Pan-Arabism, Palestinianism provided a cause that the Soviets could use to unite all the Arabs of the Middle East against the West. Okay, so Christ the Checkpoint has moved into and away from their early beginnings in replacement theology, supersessionism, triumphalism, the idea that the church has triumphed over Israel. They're still replacement theologians, they're still supersessionists, but they've moved away from theology into Chrislamismarxianity. There's a great article in Restoration Magazine by one of ISGAP's fellows, research fellows, scholars, Nia Lecht, Hamas, Communism, and the End of America. And if you haven't read it, it's a great article, and I'll just read an excerpt. Much has been written on the bizarre alliance between Marxists and Islamists, and it is bizarre. Marxists and Islamists have many differences, but in the broader context of globalization, the Marxists and Islamists emerge as bedfellows intent on spreading anti-Western, anti-imperialist ideologies. So what happened this year at Christ the Checkpoint is they invited not theologians to speak. They invited activists. They invited Marxists. So all the speakers, and I took the time, you're welcome, to listen to the speeches. It was 3 days of darkness to listen to the Marxist speakers at this year's Christ the Checkpoint. So I wrote 2 pieces for the Times of Israel, the myth of the Palestinian Nakba, and the central role it plays in the Palestinian Christian narrative. The title, Christ the Checkpoint Dupes Gullible Evangelicals with the Nakba Lie. And the Nakba, of course, is the catastrophe of the Jews in 1948. What did I say? Jews. No, not of the Jews taking over their land, coming back to their land, 1948. So the Nakba, what is said today, that Palestinians are still in this catastrophe. They live every day in the catastrophe of the return of the Jews and the establishment of the State of Israel. So you can follow that article in the Times of Israel. I wrote another piece, The Emergence of the Unholy Alliance of Christianity, Islamism, and Marxism. how Palestine has become the new global center for evangelical and mainline denominational delegitimization of Zionism. And the article's entitled, Christ at the Checkpoint Pushes Woke Anti-Semitism, Empowering Extremists. And that article I wrote post Christ at the Checkpoint this year. So, moving right along. This is a clip of, at Christmas time. Pastor Munther Isaac is the director of Christ the Checkpoint. He's become a darling in the evangelical left. He's presently, starting tomorrow, a 1-month tour in the United States of major evangelical universities, colleges, and churches. He'll be speaking at Wheaton College, my alma mater, tomorrow, fomenting his Marxism, anti-Zionism, and anti-Semitism.
This news is funded by viewers like you. Please support our work at democracynow.org/give. We begin today's show in the occupied West Bank, in the city of Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus. City and church leaders canceled all Christmas festivities in the Holy Land this year to mourn the more than 20,000 Palestinians killed in Gaza.
This was just a few months ago.
The Evangelical Lutheran Christmas Church in Bethlehem created a nativity scene with the figure of baby Jesus and a keffiyeh surrounded by rubble. Later in the show, we'll be joined by the church.
Jesus is a Palestinian.
Isaac, but we begin by airing his Christmas sermon, which he delivered on Saturday.
Okay, so you can look up that sermon. This is, after that, he became an international star. And this is Tucker Carlson interviewing Pastor Munther Isaac.
If you wake up in the morning and decide that your Christian faith requires you to support a foreign government blowing up churches and killing Christians, I think you've lost the thread. Just to end on this, if you had a message for Christian leaders in the United States, whether in government or in churches or citizens who care about the religion of their fellow Christians, what would it be?
It would be to remind them that when the state of Israel was created, it was not created on an empty land. It was created on a land that had millions of indigenous Palestinians there, including Palestinian Christians. And that state they support, that state they celebrated as a fulfillment of prophecy and a sign of God's gift to the Jewish people for it to become a state. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, including Palestinian Christians, were forced to leave and have never returned. Churches were closed. A friend of mine did a research and counted more than 30 churches that were closed when Israel was created because Palestinians were expelled from the land. Our numbers continue to be in decline. So we're pleading that come and listen, come and talk to us. And my message to Christian leaders right now is there is a very, very brutal war taking place in Gaza, a war that I describe using the word genocide because it's a war that has used even starvation as a mean. And fellow Christians are suffering because of that war. It's time that Christian leaders recognize that.
Okay. This is Daniel Bonara. Daniel is a PhD student in Quranic studies at Notre Dame in Indiana. Daniel has podcasts where he talks about the glories of Islam and the connection between Christianity and Islam and the merging of Islamism with Christianity. This is his speech just 2 months ago at Christ the Checkpoint. These are evangelical leaders from churches, seminaries from all over the country, all over the world.
Finished working on that statement together. And we finished this draft. We called Christian leaders and pastors and theologians who uncritically supported Israel's war to repent. We reminded them of the context of 75 years of apartheid and oppression and settler colonialism. We pointed out the double standard that humanizes Israeli Jews while insisting on dehumanizing Palestinians and whitewashing their suffering. We explained that the double standard is a direct result of entrenched colonial and white supremacist discourses and ideologies of power and supremacy. We grounded our response, our critique in a prophetic tradition to speak truth to power. We looked at the ministry of Christ who came to give liberty to the oppressed. For us Palestinians, this has been obvious. This is the issue of Christian Zionism, and we have consistently, especially at Crossing the Checkpoint, have defined Christian Zionism and Zionism in general as a form of racism, that it's fundamentally, ontologically speaking, is a racist ideology of supremacy and domination and violence. But that is only part of a larger issue of supremacy and bigotry and racism and hatred that is so part and parcel of Christianity in the world. Munder made the statement in his Christmas sermon that Gaza has become the moral compass of the world.
It's become the moral compass of the world.
Not to upstage Munder, I would never be able to do that. But I think I would move beyond that and say Gaza actually represents a theological crisis. Right? Palestine, by extension, is a theological crisis for the West. Just like white supremacy is, just like racism is, just like patriarchy is, Palestine is a theological crisis. And the majority of Christians in the West, have not even done the work to reflect on what does it mean to think Christianly about Palestinians and Palestine.
Okay, so that's just repackaged Marxism. White supremacy, colonialism. There's nothing theological in these messages. It's repackaged Marxism. This is an Anglican priest, Renee August, from Cape Town, South Africa, and not a theologian. She's an activist. In her bio, she calls herself a harmony builder.
When the famine had spread throughout the whole country, Joseph opened the storehouses and, what does it say? Sold the grain to the Egyptians. What? Whose grain was it? Who provided the grain? And Joseph commodifies what God had given freely. Whenever we commodify anything, we make decisions about who has it and who won't. This is a crime against humanity. Can I hear an amen? And so the famine is so severe in chapter 47, there was no food in the land, and people came to Joseph. Joseph, we are hungry. Casually it says, Joseph gathered all the money in Egypt for Pharaoh. You notice the movement of economic power toward the empire. And when they have no more money, Joseph says, give me your livestock. And so they bring all the livestock in exchange for grain, and now who has all the livestock? The empire. And then when they have no more livestock, they come and they say, Joseph, please, we are hungry. The famine is severe. And Joseph says, give me your land. The movement of spatial power now rests for the empire. And finally they come, Joseph, please, we have no more money, we have no more livestock, we have no more land, we only have ourselves. Enslave us and our descendants so that we will not.
Okay, you've seen enough of her. All right. Pardon?
What is the end of the sentence?
We will not die. I won't take time for this one. This is Shireen Awad Hillel, And she's a professor at Bethlehem Bible College, and she talks about the Nakba and the persecution over all of these years since 1948, and is calling for the expulsion of Jews from the land.
So if we look at 1948 and
I won't take time for that one. Yosef Khoury, professor at Bethlehem Bible College. We'll move on.
They relied on promises to claim a right to Palestine and justify settler colonialism. Ancient stories of chosenness, theologies of election, promised land, and even end times theologies have become, as Palestinian theologian Fruh calls it, the software for an imperial colonial hardware.
Okay, so all of the theology that says the Jewish people are chosen, that is the software for colonial hardware. This is Anthony Kerr, young Palestinian Bible college student at Bethlehem Bible College.
Therefore, when I was in Desmond Tutu's memorial in Cape Town, I came across this beautiful saying by Desmond Tutu, which I would love to read it for you. Black theology seems to make sense of the life experience of the black man, which is largely black suffering at the hands of rampant white racism. Black theology has to do with whether it's possible to be black and continue to be Christian. Is it to ask, on what side is God? And while I was reading it, I changed every single word from black to Palestinian, and it says the same exact thing. And I'll read it again. Palestinian theology seems to make sense of the life experience of the Palestinian man, which is largely Palestinian suffering at the hands of rampant Zionist racism. Palestinian theology has to do with whether it is possible to be Palestinian Arab and continue to be Christian. It is to ask ourselves, on whose side is God? Or in our context, on what side of the wall? Thank you, Pastor Munder, for that. This is why I say, and I will continue to say, that Azania's South Africa's history is today's our reality. I really cannot compare apartheid with apartheid. However, I really thought humanity was going to learn from history. But once again, humanity has proven all else wrong. This massacre has taught us a lot. Especially taught me that being Palestinian is no longer an ethnicity. It has become a movement for liberation. And this is why today I am more than proud to say that every South African today has become Palestinian, and every Palestinian has become South African. This is why I say every Indian Dalit has become Palestinian, and every Palestinian has become Dalit. I say every Latin American who has suffered from colonization and oppression from governments has become Palestinian, and every Palestinian is Latin American. And I say every person who has suffered from ethnic cleansing, segregation, death, and poverty is today Palestinian. We will remain with our sumud, our steadfastness, as we continue to fight against the injustices we've been seeing in our own holy land by the hands of the empire. You may all have read this verse. For truly I say to you, if you have faith like a grain of mustard seed, you can tell to this mountain to move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. Well, here in Palestine, we like to change this up a little bit, which is something I learned in South Africa. We like to change verses. And we say, to this wall, not to move from here to there, but to crumble to the ground and become the rubble that Gaza has become today. And that
radicalized. I'll play one more. This is PLO ambassador to the UK, Hassam Zomlet. He was recently interviewed on CBS about a month after 10/7 and refused to say that Hamas committed atrocities. So he and Pastor Munther Isaac are very close friends and was invited, a PLO ambassador, a terrorist, to speak at Christ the Checkpoint in May.
Ambassador Dr. Hassam Zomlet is the head of the Palestinian mission to the United Kingdom and Strategic Affairs Advisor to the Palestinian President. Prior to this appointment to the UK, Dr. Zomlet served as the ambassador to the United States, head of the PLO General Delegation to the US. Together, let's all welcome Ambassador Hussam Zumlot.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, friends, welcome to Bethlehem, welcome to Palestine. I hope you are enjoying some legendary Palestinian hospitality in the birthplace of Jesus Christ. I hope too that you will take to heart the central message of Christ at the checkpoint. This very important conference organized by the Right Reverend Dr. Munda Ishaq, the pastor of the Lutheran Church in Bethlehem. Munda is a dear friend and a powerful voice for justice. Thank you for organizing this very important conference.
I have a friend that's very close, knows Munther Isaac, not in a friendship, but has spoken at Christ the Checkpoint to give the other side. And he's told me he's convinced that Munther Isaac is on the payroll of the Hamas. And we talked about yesterday, dhimmi status, complete dhimmi status under Islamic authority. Okay. So what does all this mean? Christ the Checkpoint sent out a call for repentance for churches all around America. And about a month later, this is response to an October 20th call to repentance to Christians around the world to repent for supporting Israel. And church leaders gathered together to give a response to this call of repentance. And this was signed by evangelical seminary professors throughout the world, megachurch pastors throughout the world. And I'll just read one line here. Collectively, we confess that at various points in our Christian journey, we have been influenced by actively supporting and or helping promote Zionist theologies. We confess that we have failed to recognize the ways we have operated according to the logics of white supremacy, accepting the false narrative that Palestinian Arab people are our inherent enemies. So they have crossed over as well into Chrislamismarxianity. So where do we go from here? And I'll conclude with this. This is an article in the Jerusalem Post, February 12th, 2024. And it's talking about a survey that was recently done by the University of North Carolina. They did a survey in 2018 and resurveyed the same audience in 2021, 4 years later. And what they found is within evangelical millennials, that's 18 to 34-year-olds, in 2018, 70% of evangelical millennials were pro-Israel. 4 years later, in 2021, that number was cut in half. So it's down now to about 30 to 35% of evangelical millennials supporting Israel. And I'll just read this quote. Other findings as of late 2021, only 33.6% of young evangelicals under 30 support Israel compared to 67.9% in 2018. At the same time in 2021, 24.3% of young evangelicals said they support Palestinians compared to 5% 3 years later. So we're seeing this shift within the Christian world from the old Zionism, Christian Zionism, under guys like John Hagee. It's aging out. Most Christian Zionists today are probably 50 and above. I would even say 60 and above, Christian Zionists. The young evangelicals aren't buying it. They're not buying political Zionism, Christian Zionism. So they're being influenced by the new mutation of anti-Semitism, which Rabbi Sachs says is based on human rights. So as these speakers said, white colonialism, white supremacy, apartheid, Israel is oppressing the Palestinians. So this message is catching on. And so Munther Isaac will be speaking at Friends of Sabeel in North America starting tomorrow. 1 month tour to major churches and universities fomenting Chrislamismarxianity, and young evangelicals are buying it. So that's my talk, and I'm done. 11:30.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Question. Last year, I remember you were talking about the rise of the radical right.
Right.
You were putting emphasis on that. And now you're supposed last year you were focusing more on the radical right. Now
Right. Yes, on the left.
On the radical left of Christianity. What's the status in a nutshell? There's a lot, I'm not asking a question specifically on this presentation. But what's the status of the extreme right now?
Yeah, it's called Christian nationalism, and there's a difference between patriotism and nationalism. Patriotism is, I'm a patriot. I mean, I love America. Thank God for America. A Christian nationalist is one who wants to forcibly change America, bring it back to its Christian founding, and make America a Christian nation. So that movement, Charles, is still progressing, still growing. In my opinion, I mean, this is a very dangerous movement. And the shift this year, to me, was breathtaking at Christ the Checkpoint, because it's always been a theological organization based on bad theology, but on theology. This year shifted 100% into Marxism. It's dangerous, but to me, Christian anti-Semitism that comes from the left is slow-moving, like climate change or a tropical storm. Christian nationalism, Christian anti-Semitism from the right, to me, moves like a hurricane. And historically, Christian right, Nazi Germany, for example, has always moved to great extremes. And so the Christian nationalists of today are using very violent language. Go ahead.
With the assassination attempt at Trump.
Right.
Is this sort of rallying up?
There's Christian nationalists that are saying, actually, he was shot in the right ear, right? So the new Christian nationalist theology is saying that the priests in the Old Testament, they took the blood of the right ear, Dan, and they placed it on the altar. So this was Trump's anointing by God himself for the blood of his right ear. I mean, this is the stuff these guys are saying. And they truly believe that Trump is the savior of America. It's the new religion. MAGAism is the new religion of the religious right.
Sorry, yeah. Thank you for your presentation. Just to piggyback off of Charles's question, when you talked about the numbers for evangelical Christians, like the 50% drop, the under 50 years old,
right.
Are you only talking about the left, or are you seeing that across the board?
Across the board. The survey was for evangelicals and gender, whether they're from the right or the left. They polled evangelical millennials.
And are we seeing that seep into American right politicians at all, like in terms of their platforms? If that's such a strong opinion in the under 50, I would imagine you would see it.
Candace Owens, for example, Tucker Carlson, who are Christian nationalists, they have adopted the same mentality concerning Israel. They've become anti-Zionist, and they have huge platforms, and they would be considered Christian evangelicals.
I have a lot to say and a lot of questions, so I'm going to try to be quick. In terms of the United States, I lean right. Okay. So I see Antifa, Black Lives Matters mob coming with their anti-Semitic sentiments, with their anti-American, burning the flag down. And yet, on the other side, we have Candace Owens, as you just said, and all that you just said. So, how do we not lose our country as the United States but also squash or dismantle this anti-Semitism that you're saying that lives within the hearts and minds of these people? That's one question.
Okay.
So it's crucial because we have to save the country from radical left and Marxism, right? So that's one. The second thing is, I'm gravely concerned for the future of the world, especially the United States, because the future politicians, the future academics, these are these 20, 30 some year olds that are completely anti-Zionist, anti-Jewish. Right. So what is the prescription for this? And finally, what was the pushback? I know Philos Project, Luke Muna, Philos Project pushed back on Munter.
Right.
But have you seen good Christians rise in response to and against Munter?
All you have to do is Google Munter, Christ the Checkpoint, and try to find Christian writers, pastors, seminary professors that are pushing back, and you'll find my articles, and you might find one or two more. That's it. No one's pushing back. Why? They're neutral. And because of the steamroller of woke anti-Semitism within evangelicalism, they don't want to push back. I'll give you an example. After 10/7, I live in the Gulf Coast, so in my area, I serve on the Jewish-Christian Dialogue. I do a lot of projects with the Jewish Federation. I work closely with the Jewish community. I'm a part of that community. And so the three rabbis in town are my friends, and they call the Jewish Federation, will you please call Aaron for us and ask, is there going to be a Christian response to 10/7? So the Jewish Federation called me and said, what do you think? And I said, well, of course there's going to be a Christian response. I knew in my heart, probably not. It's going to be difficult. So I got off the phone. I started calling pastors that I knew. Big churches, large churches, Episcopalian, Baptist, Pentecostal. I was on the phone for a week talking to secretaries. How many pastors called me back? This is 4 days after 10/7. 0. They didn't want to be involved. They didn't want, my question was, could we use your facility to have a Christian Jewish gathering to stand with our Jewish friends in our community? No one called me back. One pastor had the audacity to text me and say, next time something like this happens, give me a little more notice. We're very busy right now in our congregation, and we can't allow a meeting like this. I wanted to say, sir, pastor, I'll be sure to call Hamas and ask them, before you attack and beastly murder people, give me a couple weeks' notice so I can call this pastor. Long story short, a Southern Baptist pastor who was on his way to Israel before 10/7 got stuck somewhere in Europe because he got turned around, came home, immediately called me and said, 100%, the doors are open. And so a week later, after 10/7, we had a gathering. We had the Israeli ambassador to Atlanta who spoke. We had the 3 rabbis that spoke. The Jewish Federation asked me, can we plan it? I said, the pastor says, you've got their facility. It's your meeting. You plan it. It was beautiful. We had prayers for the deceased. We had an Israeli IDF soldier that had come to work with a synagogue in town. She spoke. You can see it on our Facebook page. It's a very moving night. There was 1,000 Christians. The first thing the Jewish community asked me was, is there security? So the mayor was there, and he brought probably 10 snipers. I mean, we had the police force that was very strong. But anyway, the point is, in the Bible Belt, called 10 churches, no one responded.
How do we break this alliance? Can you answer the other? Yeah, but he didn't answer.
May I say that?
Okay.
I'd love to.
How do you break the alliance of Christianity, Marxism, and Islamism? It's a movement, right? And it has it has wheels, and it's a steamroller. And so Gary Burge, great example. One guy changed a generation into anti-Zionist. So it's got to be people like you that take up this mantle of speaking into and about Christian anti-Semitism. Go ahead.
Robert is next, and then Amy. And also I want to say, again, I think maybe my presentation, I spoke about globalization. We really need to understand that in this moment of neoliberalism and globalization and a crisis of the state and a crisis of the economy, the socio-economic and political processes impacting on fragmentation, the extreme right, the extreme left, and political Islam is attacking the democratic center. And we've seen this film before. We've seen this between World War I and World War II. We can't simply stop this. There's major processes occurring. We need to understand this. Robert.
Thank you, Charles, and thank you, Eddie. You know, I come from Boca Raton, and I come from Boca Raton, and I've been very fortunate to know many rabbis, and I have a very good relationship with them. You know, I'm a speaker there, and they like to invite me. And mainly, you know, from Naifora, which is what the biggest congregation, they make, you know, dialogue of civilization. And mainly they invite, you know, some evangelical, the Episcopalian Church, and others. Mainly the language that was there. There is a kind of a differentiation between Israel and the West Bank. So here I'm asking you, when you were there, is there any differentiation when they speak about Israel and legitimizing Israel and the West Bank, or mainly, you know, we are supporting, because when I go to these conferences, and mainly sometimes close groups between rabbis and some influential people from West Palm Beach and Boca Raton, you know, they make a difference between Israel and the West Bank. And also there is something also that I have seen, including among our students, you know, and including with certain rabbis, is that, you know, the Jews early on, when they see what's happening in Gaza, there's something with them, and this is what's more with the progressive on my campus, including the professor. We support social justice because didn't God tell us we are called to be just and righteous?
Right.
So my point is 2 points. Is there any distinction when you are with them, when you are meeting with them, between the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, and Israel? And second,
are you talking about the liberal left evangelicals?
Liberal or not liberal?
Okay.
You know,
right.
This is why. And on the other hand, the idea of social justice as laid out now or being exploited by the Palestinian and their supporter to attack Israel.
Yeah. So from the Christian left, they would not see any significance to the land. The land has been erased. The issue of the land biblically has been erased. The land now belongs to the Livingstones, who are Palestinian Christians.
So river to sea.
River to the sea. Palestine belongs to the Palestinians, doesn't belong to the Jews. On the Christian right, what drives the Christian right, so Christian nationalists, this is the difficult thing to understand, is Christian nationalists are Zionist, but there is a growing anti-Semitism within Christian nationalists. So how does that happen? They believe that the Jews, the Hollywood, George Soros, all their pinpointed Jewish enemies, they're the ones destroying America. So it's the Jews destroying America. And I get that when I speak in like a conservative church. Always someone will come up and say, I enjoyed your message, it was great, but when will the Jews realize they're the problem in America? That comes from the Christian right. And so the Christian right loves Zion because, and this is a theological phrase, premillennial dispensationalism, which was started by John Darby in the late 1800s, who influenced American Protestantism with his theology of dispensationalism, that Israel is going to be reestablished, and when Israel is reestablished, that is the key for Jesus to return. And so because of that theology, Christian Zionism was formed to help get the Jews back to Israel, to establish a strong state, to prove their point of an early rapture. And so right-leaning evangelical Christians are driven by premillennial dispensationalism. I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Can I say how much I appreciated your lecture? Because you did something in the way that you set this up, where I think you make it really clear that we're being attacked from, I would say, not the extreme left and not the extreme right, the left and right. And going back to David Harris, we have to be swivel-headed. So I want to ask you this question. So for those who might not be aware, democracy now is not far left. This is kind of a left BBC in the United States. And Tucker Carlson has the ear, what's left of his ear, of Trump. It was Tucker Carlson who got Donald Trump to take on J.D. Vance. So it's left and right, and I'm wondering what you think about this. Some of this analysis of left and right is pre-10-7. I would argue it's even before. We keep talking about left and right, and I understand. I love the analysis where we have to be very clear, like what you just did with this kind of nationalist and all that. But I don't think, and I'd like to know your take on this, I don't think it's particularly helpful for us to always talk in terms of left and right. I think in order to be clear and move ahead, it's what David Harris said, we have to be swivel-headed. Only the thing is, we don't have to go like this anymore. It's infecting the entire political spectrum, and it's not unique to the United States. This just happens in France for Jews. So it's happened in Britain for Jews. So I was wondering strategically what we're supposed to do as Jews in terms of this left-right stuff. How is it that you're thinking about that given your presentation?
Well, for me, maybe I don't think in terms of left and right, but evangelical liberalism and evangelical conservatism, whether it be left or right, on both sides, Israel seems to be in the middle, And so what concerns me most today is Elie Wiesel said, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. And there's an indifference, there's always been an indifference within Christianity. But now that indifference is being fueled by, political forces that are drawing people into, different corners in the boxing arena.
So there's one more question, but just in response to Amy, I think we're not that far apart. But what I'm saying, forgive me for using the word, but there's something structural happening that we need to be aware of. And I don't think it's like individuals or individual groups or individual churches. There's something deeper happening.
But I don't think the structure is left versus right. I think
well, that's why I keep referring to neoliberal globalization, fragmentation of society. There's something happening.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Dr. Aaron, for your presentation.
Not a doctor, but I'm an activist.
Okay.
Masquerading as a scholar,
Yeah. And thank you for a moving story. I really like the moving story at the beginning. It was really moving, and it's an inspiration to speak about your DNA and your connection into your family. My question is the following. I'm sorry, Amy, I go back to politics. So you see that there is an alliance between the extreme left, I'm speaking about the European context,
okay.
The extreme left and the Islamists. Of course, from one hand, from the other hand, we have the rise of the far right. And lately, in the European elections in France, in Belgium, in the UK, and especially in Europe, in France, Belgium, Germany, we have the rise of the far right, and they base their campaign on the fact that there is an anti-immigration sentiment, anti-Muslim immigration, etc. But they always say that they are not anti-Semitic. On the contrary, they want to forget about their past because some of the leaders have like a connection with anti-Semitic figures. Do you believe that this version is the true one, or do you think that the far right is a threat, like the extreme left? Thank you.
When you say far right, are you talking Christian far right or political? Yeah, I think it's much more than a threat. The language in the Christian far right is becoming dangerous. We're talking about hanging Jews in America, right? So that was in my, you can see that presentation last year, but I think the Christian far right is much more dangerous than the left, although the left is very dangerous as well. Yes. Yeah, Christian.
Two questions at a time.
Okay.
Hey, Aaron, thank you very much for an absolutely wide opening presentation. I had no idea that as a Latin American, I'm a Palestinian. And I also had no idea that they have been working on wheat as if it was rocket science. Can you please enlighten me on how and when did the doctrine of Christianity, in this case the evangelic doctrine, and in any case any Christian doctrine, merge with Marxist doctrine, very deadly doctrine towards theology, especially Christianity? Because I had really no idea when and how this actually
Durban
happened.
2021, I think. Yeah. Liberation theology of Latin America in the 60s, which was Marxist theology. Just name a teak who started Christ the Checkpoint. That was the foundation, which was Marxism back in 2010. So.
Thank you. So briefly, two brief questions. I'm so glad you pointed out that in the American Christian right, their sentiment, attitudes towards Jews and attitudes towards Israel can diverge in a way where there can be pro-Israel sentiment, but also virulent anti-Semitism towards actual Jews. So the question related to that is, do you see beginnings of unholy alliances where people, and how is that playing out in the community, where people are clinging to the pro-Israel sentiment on the right while ignoring some of the dog whistles for those in the American community, Jews that are there? And then the second question is, for those of us who are less familiar with the evangelical landscape, can you locate, when you're saying left-leaning evangelicals, can you locate that a little bit better for us? Is that within the evangelical community, left-leaning, still on the American right? Like,
So denominationally, within Christianity, you have the United Church of Christ, you have Presbyterian USA, which is an evangelical movement. Presbyterian USA drives the BDS movement. There's Presbyterian denomination, there's the Presbyterian USA. So Presbyterian USA drives the BDS movement. The United Methodists that I've been following for 15 years now, every time they have a national conference, they call a vote to vote on divesting their minister retirement funds from any business that does work with Israel. It never passes because there's a conservative element within the United Methodists, which is America's largest denomination. United Methodists is a split between the right-leaning and the left-leaning Christians within United Methodism. And so this conference in May, they voted for BDS. So United Methodist is an evangelical major denomination. Church of Christ, I mean, on down the line. Mega evangelical non-denominational churches, call them non-DOMs, like Willow Creek Community, which was the largest church in America. Gary Burge, it's in Chicago, was a consistent speaker at Willow Creek Community, 30,000 attendees on a Sunday morning. The pastor's wife went to the Palestinian territories, wrote a book against Zionism, so that church became an anti-Zionist. So that church was always a conservative church, but in the issue of Israel, they moved over into an anti-Zionist. The pastor was recently stepped down for moral failure. It's interesting how Genesis says, whoever shows you contempt, I will cause to be fruitless. And it's like I see all these guys in Christendom that show contempt towards Israel, and I watch them year after year. They go into the dust of history, you know, so.
Two quick, very concise, and then those very concise, so collecting two, and then.
So help us understand why the young evangelicals that you're talking about,
right,
they tend to almost all still vote Republican. And so to that extent, they don't appear to outsiders really that different from the older generation of evangelicals, other than their support for Israel. So it seems like also there's potentially a dilemma fight within the Republican Party itself for the evangelicals as compared to the Christians on the left that have a very different sort of political viewpoint.
Yeah, I don't know if they all vote Republican. I mean, young evangelicals, the issues. Okay.
Super fast. When did this group hijack the more longer ongoing concern of Christians with the ethnic cleansing of Christians by the Islamists? Yep. So like the classic every year Bethlehem used to be 95% Christian,
right,
and now it's 5.
12, yes, 12%, I think.
How is the evangelical concept of promise rather than prophecy, so the John Hagee approach? So Hagee follows very much what you're saying, bless us, you know,
right,
be blessed. How is that showing any resilience in this? And you also talked about the loss of theology when there was a shift to social media during COVID. Is that what dumbed it down away from theology to propaganda?
Okay. Okay. Young evangelicals on other polling data, for example, abortion 20 years ago was a major concern of evangelicals. Not anymore. Young evangelicals, not an issue. Same-sex marriage used to be an issue within not anymore in the younger evangelicals. Israel, 35% are now supportive. 70 are either anti or neutral. And so there's a huge value shift. And so we are aging out of the evangelical Zionist. To add to this, I have a colleague in Jerusalem. He's runs the Jerusalem office for the American Center for Law and Justice under Jay Sekulow. That organization defends Israel at the International Court of The Hague. So my colleague in Jerusalem, we've been talking about this for years. He's concerned. And so he's gone to President Herzog. I did a presentation for President Herzog last month. It's being presented to him, this information, to let him know there should be a concern within Israel higher government that, my estimation, 10 years evangelicalism is going to age out of Zionism, and Israel is going to lose their greatest ally, which is the evangelical church in America. And it's because of the changing value system within the millennial age group. Anyway, put it into one question, because
what happened to the concern of Christians for Christians, given their decimation?
That's a great question. So why doesn't Christ the Checkpoint talk about when Palestinian territories, I would call Judea and Samaria, were under Israeli control? 86% in Bethlehem were Christians. Today, it's 12%. What happened to all the Christians in Bethlehem? So Jack Serra, who's the president of Bethlehem Bible College, in an interview on Fox News just last month, said the reason why so many Christians are leaving Bethlehem is because of the Jewish occupation, Zionist occupation. What's really happening is they're being oppressed by Fatah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad. They're either being killed or they're leaving.
That's the reality.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all of the information you gave to us. I think it's really important to hear from you because there are some things that happen around Christianity and we need time to understand the process. So there is one question that I need to ask you. Who is the radical Christian and the left and the right? So are they based on the political parties in the US? How do you define those? That's one question. Because when you say the left and the right in church and Christianity, I didn't know which one you were talking about. Of course, I go to church in the US and I needed to understand who is left and who is right. That's one, sorry. And then another thing I wanted to ask, not to mention, is that you probably heard of CUFI.
Right.
I know this is a strong movement supporting Israel and trying everything they can to preach the gospel of how, as Christians, we have to support Israel. So there has been one example that I have to bring to your attention to show how sometimes Christians for Israel can get things mixed up to the congregants. Like you can have one Christian who is tattooing the number on the right arm or left just to show that they support Israel. And in my understanding, someone mentioned to me that it's not appropriate to tattoo the number of someone because this is how the Jews were going to be identified as to be killed. So that's one of the things.
Let me answer that question real quick as we close. So John Hagee, great organization, doing good work, but I mean, as far as supporting Israel, CUFI, yeah. CUFI is supporting the state of Israel, but remember that message is not catching on in the millennial generation, the message of premillennial dispensationalism of the coming of Jesus. So millennials don't buy that. It's not important to them. And so again, CUFI is being aged out because that whole message is not catching on within millennial Christians. It's not important to them. The coming of Jesus, the rapture is not important. So that's why there's a disconnect within millennials.
So on that note, Aaron, thank you so much.